As we turn our focus now on South Africa's credit history, it has come under the spotlight once again after the country's National Financial Ombud Scheme found that 62% of complaints against credit providers were resolved in favour of consumers. Now, this finding suggests that in many cases that have been reported, lenders failed to follow the proper processes or to treat consumers fairly. With complaints rising by 58% in 2025, the Ombud says that some lenders are placing profit ahead of fairness, with related cases involving unlawful vehicle retention, excessive debt restructuring, unfair billing, and fraud listings without sufficient evidence. Joining us now to discuss this further is Nerosha Maseti, lead ombud at the Banking and Credit Division of the National Financial Ombud Scheme, South Africa, the NFO. A very good evening to you. A very troubling report coming out of the Ombud there, ruling in favour of consumers in 62% of the cases that were actually investigated and reported. Does this point to isolated incidents, do you believe, or is it evidence of systemic problems within the credit industry? Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Thami, and thank you so much for inviting me, and a very good evening to your viewers. The complaints that came before us, yes, we made findings in over 62% in favor of the complainants. We haven't seen a systemic issue or a trend. We have seen issues across the board, across the industries, and I think our annual report gives some good insight as to the type of complaints we're seeing. Vehicle repossession, for instance, are matters that we quite often see where the credit provider doesn't follow the legal process that it's obligated to follow in terms of the National Credit Act in repossessing the vehicle. That is by way of voluntary surrender, where the customer initiates that, or by obtaining a court order. There's a very interesting case that you will find in the annual report where the customer failed to make payments, and then the credit provider decided the vehicle went in for repairs. And because he fell in arrears, the credit provider then decided to hold on to the vehicle and not release the vehicle, which of course is not the correct procedure in terms of repossession, in terms of the Act. You need to either get a voluntary surrender, which that credit provider was unable to provide, or issue a court order. And in that instance, we definitely made a finding in favor of the complainant there. Other issues, there are fraud-related issues, fraud listings. As you may be aware, that if a customer is listed for fraud, there's very serious consequences for that customer. And in many instances, we found that customers were listed. When we engaged the credit provider, it was ascertained that there wasn't sufficient evidence for the listing. And because of the lack of evidence, our recommendation was, listen, there's a problem here. You will need to remove the listing immediately, which then they adhered to.
The report does suggest that some lenders are prioritizing profit over treating customers fairly. How widespread is this culture, and what's behind it? What's driving this?
I think you know what it is, Thami. It is more a case of education. I think education, consumer education, and also education in the credit provider space in terms of training and understanding where they need to color in between the lines. I don't think at this stage it'll be responsible for me to say, listen, it's a systemic issue or it's a trend. I do think we've identified gaps across the industry, from the small credit providers to the bigger guys, that there's definitely room for improvement in terms of customer education and also in terms of training with their own staff and their own processes and understanding the consumer protection legislation around that, customer service failings, what needs to be done when you are acting outside contractual terms. Also, there's a lot of issues coming through where when a customer complains, the credit provider is not dealing with the complaint properly in terms of giving proper reasons as to why this happened, providing the proper evidence, for instance, in the fraud listing, or also advising these consumers that they can come to the NFO should they want the matter to be addressed.
So I'd like us just to wrap up with this quite quickly. The current penalties that are in place or the regulatory measures, are they strong enough to deter repeat offenders within the credit industry?
I just think over there I need to highlight the difference in the mandate. The NFO, remember, we deal with specific complaints brought against specific credit providers, and we resolve that specific matter. In terms of penalties, I think that's more in the regulator space because they are mandated to pick up systemic issues and trends, and they are more, their mandate is to issue fines and issue penalties in instances where they find serious transgressions. We are, from the annual report, you'll see we deal with specific complaints and find resolutions for that specific consumer that requested assistance from our office.
Well, I must thank you so much for your time this evening, Ms. Nerosha Maseti, lead ombud at the Banking and Credit Division of the National Financial Ombud Scheme, South Africa.